Hi, my name is Pat LeBlanc, and on January 20th, 1981, I was aboard a submarine, the USS HENRY CLAY, SSBN 625. I was part of the Gold Crew. I was making my second patrol, and a month before to the day, I had got my Silver Dolphins. I was qualified in submarines. And much to my chagrin, I was still the junior guy on board, and everybody else on board was qualified submarines too. So I had to go back to mess cooking. But I got a pretty sweet deal in that. I ended up being the night mess cook, the overnight guy with the night baker. He was a Filipino guy named Ray Bataro. And he was just a great guy. And we had all kinds of fun. We laughed together. And when you're the midnight cowboy, you get the first donut. You get to try everything he makes. All the bacon stuff happens overnight. And he was my guy. But so, as I said, though, it was January 20th, 1981, and history was about to happen, one way or another, and something happened that just a whole lot of people don't know about, and I want to tell you my story. So, Ronald Reagan had been elected, and Jimmy Carter was on his way out, and it's not a secret that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan really did not get along, and it turns out they didn't like each other. And I had no idea, no clue, no concept of politics. I was 18, and to be honest, I hadn't even voted in the first election that I was able to, which was that one that just happened. We were leaving. I hadn't registered to do the vote by mail thing, and I missed it. So I didn't even have a dog in the fight, so to speak. But Ronald Reagan went out there on the West Portico, and he took the oath, and he became the president. And if you ever get a chance to see the video, get a chance to YouTube that, go look at that, and you'll see him say some things about the transition of power and how smooth it goes and how things are like that. And Jimmy Carter kind of winces, and if you know to look for it, it's there. And he's wincing because it's what Alexander Haig, the guy who would later stand up and say, "I'm the man in charge," when Reagan got shot, and he'd lose his job over it because he wasn't in charge of shit. But anyway, he said that the transition had a couple of hiccups, or a minor hiccup. Well, I'm going to tell you about hiccup. So we were out there, and everybody knew this was coming, and it was briefed to us. We had training saying, hey, when it gets to be midnight or very shortly after, we're going to go to Battle Stations Missile, because they need to change the football codes over from one president to the other. Well, that kind of makes sense, So normally, though, for mid-rats, which is the midnight meal, they would just put out leftovers or put out a tray of lunch meat, throw out some tuna fish. Guys come and make a sandwich or whatever. It's the midnight meal. But for guys getting up on watch or guys coming off of watch, they're 6-hour watches. It breaks up into 4 parts of the day. So for those guys, coming on or going off, it's something, keep your belly full, or grab something on your way to hit the rack or whatever when you're done. But it was never anything special. But because we all knew we were going to be up, they'd planned something special. So we had a steak dinner. And as a one-man show, I was just cleaning up, what basically amounted to dishes after guys eating sandwiches and stuff, or leftovers. It was no big deal. There's a commercial dishwasher in there, and I'd rinse the plates off and put them in the dishwasher, do my thing. And usually, that's the kind of meal that about half the guys eat. Some guys come and look at it and say, nah, that's not for me, and they just pass on by. Well, when you throw on a steak dinner, everybody shows up. And everybody was up because they knew this special thing was happening. So I was kind of overwhelmed. There's dishes stacked all the way to the top of the galley. And I'm in there, and I'm going at it. And it got to be about, 10 minutes after midnight. And the pile's starting to come down. But there's, I got to help Ray too. And he's got stuff. And we're baking sheets and bowls and mixing things. And all that's coming over. And I'm spraying them off in the deep sink and throwing them in the scullery and getting it going and just cranking it out. And then what was supposed to happen did happen. And the chief of the watch said on the 1MC, man, Battle Stations Missile. And the alarm goes off, and it's called the general alarm, and it goes bong, bong, bong. It goes 16 times, and they say it's one bong for every missile tube we got back there. So that goes, and there's a process that goes to this, and there's a normality to it, and there's a formality to it. And if it doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, it's actually a security violation. But a couple seconds later, and it seemed like it took longer than it normally did, because usually they call battle stations, and the XO's right there in control, the CO's right there in control, and it's boom, boom, bang. They do what they're supposed to do. But what normally happens is the XO grabs the 1MC mic, and he's got one, the captain's got one, and he clicks it and says, man, battle station's missile for WSRT, which is a weapons systems readiness test. For WSRT, this is the XO, this is an exercise. And then he lets go of the mic, the CO clicks his and says, man, battle station's missile for WSRT, this is the captain, this is an exercise. And then he'll say a bunch of stuff like denote 1, denote 3, denote, and that tells them what missiles they're going to reset, what packages they're working on. It tells the guys who are down in Missile Control Center what they're doing and what the message says. And by that time, they've already got a copy of the message, and they know what's going on too. But it's been authenticated by 2 officers, then brought to the con, and the captain and the XO agreed that the authentication is correct, and they do, what they're supposed to do. Because it'd be really bad if it came time to launch and we sent a missile to China that was supposed to go to Russia. You with me? So anyway, this time, the mic keys in the XO is very slow and very deliberate, and he says, man, battle station's missile for strategic launch. This is the executive officer. This is not a drill. Click. And it's kind of like, wow, that's different. I'm down there, washing a dish, putting it away, and it's kind of like, wow, that's really different. And you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting some more, and it must have gone a good 30 seconds. And you're used to hearing one right after the other, the XO then the CO, the XO then the CO. And then finally you get click, and he doesn't say anything right away. He says, man, battle station's missile for strategic launch. This is the commanding officer. Spin up all missiles. Click. And like the shit hits the fan. And I'm washing dishes. So these guys are running around, and they, the damage control gears broke out on the mess decks, because that's what you do, in case we start shooting, somebody starts shooting back, all the stuff's broken out, and all these people are going to their stations, and everybody knew it was going to happen. So the guy who's going to relieve the helm as the battle station's helmsman, he's already there. He's already in the seat. He's already relieved the watch. The battle station chief of the watch is there. The battle station, everybody who's in their battle station has already meandered over to where it was going to be, because they knew it was going to happen. So the big hook to this is it says strategic launch and not weapons systems readiness test. So that didn't mean a whole lot to me, because, by the way, Pat's still washing dishes, and I'm going at it, and the chief cook steps in, and Ray, the night baker guy, is taking his hat off, and I look back, and he's got tears running down his cheeks. And I'm like, Ray, dude, what's wrong? And the chief, his name was Trudeau, and his, oddly enough, his name is Ray too. He says, hey, dumbass, we're about to nuke the world. He said, we're going to shoot missiles. And I'm like, oh, cool. And he slapped me upside the back of the head, and he says, no, it's not cool. He says, we're not going to have a home to go into. He said, by the time we get there, the Cooper River Bridge is going to be laying in rumble, and Charleston's not going to be there, and where your house was, there's going to be a smoking pit. He says, because once we launch ours, the Russians are going to launch theirs. He said, do you understand how this works? And I was like, no, I guess not. And, I mean, you think about it, you heard about it, but all of a sudden in the moment, it's kind of like, I don't know. So you get to thinking about that. He said, oh, and here's the other thing. He said, you can just quit washing dishes. He says, because when we open up that first hatch, we shoot that first missile, every Russian submarine in the ocean is going to know where we're at, and they're going to start shooting back. He said, so button this thing down, put them all away. And he says, I don't give a fuck if they're clean or not. Just get it done. So I'm scrambling around, I'm putting stuff away, and there's rig for sea things you put in to make it so the plates don't come out of the racks, and doing that. And I hear on the mess decks, which is right outside the door for me, and I kind of look over, and there's guys out there, there's guys crying. I mean, wailing, crying. And it's like, wow, this is, and now it's starting to sink in. It's like, oh my God. So we're going along, and it goes exactly 17 minutes, because once it happens, you all know what the deal is, and everybody's on board. But there was a kid who was out there who said, we're all going to die. and the XO would come through the mess decks to make sure everything was happening the way it was supposed to, and going from compartment to compartment. And he grabbed this kid by the front of his shirt and he slapped him. He said, "Don't ever say that again." And he kept on going. And I remember, and I could tell you that guy's name, but I'm not gonna. But he had the XO's handprint and he was holding it, but he's tears streaming out of his eyes. And I'm still, putting dishes away and doing my thing. And I guess it hadn't even really sunk in yet. It didn't get to me till about, I don't know, honestly, about 2 years later, it hit me what had happened, and I kind of came unglued. But that's another story. So in the aftermath of this, though, there's a way you shut down from battle stations as well, and it's supposed to be the same kind of thing. It's sacred the way it all happens. Well, it didn't happen that way this time. It just there was the CO picked up the mic, says, "Secure from battle stations missile. Shut all the hatches. Put it away." And it's kind of like, oh. And one guy said, "Hey, is that a security violation?" And another guy said to him, "Just shut up. We got through this." So there's some aftermath to this, though, and this was a career-ending event for some folks. The weapons officer found out that, and I guess it's one of the kind of things like me that you talked about. We're going to shoot missiles, and the shit hits the fan, and it'll all be different, and you don't get it until you're there. Well, there were guys with loaded guns around, and it was their job to have those loaded guns. And when the weapons officer sat down in the missile control center, and they pulled out the tactical launch key, which is, I guess, about twice the size of the real one, and it's red and it's got stripes on it, and you just can't miss it, and then, it's because it's the real deal, and they lock it into place. There was a senior chief fire controlman standing behind him with a pistol at low ready, and it's a chief's job. If they say shoot and the weapons officer doesn't pull the trigger, it's his job to shoot the weapons officer, pull him out of the chair, and take over. And that wasn't lost on the weapons officer, who was in the chair, and they said he was sweating bullets. He left a puddle. And he was a great guy. I mean, he was like an uncle to me, He was a lieutenant. He was on the list for lieutenant commander, and it's like he was moving on up. And this ended up being his last patrol. He ended up as a preacher in Charleston, South Carolina. He found Jesus at 150 feet on the USS HENRY CLAY, and he wasn't the only guy. There were guys that were in the sweet spot in their career. We had another master chief who was a back aft guy, run the reactor. He decided it was time to hang it up and go home too, and he retired after that patrol. It wasn't in his plan, but he retired and went home. And there was a general atmosphere on the boat. We were pulling in about a week later. We had left Kings Bay, Georgia. We'd rode the bus down from Charleston down to Kings Bay and picked the boat up, and we were dropping the boat off to the other crew in Scotland. And the funny thing is, the other crew didn't know this had happened to us, and they got a whole bunch of paperwork together and put it together. You sign what's called a page 2 if something happens in your record that something of importance or something you can't. So we were given a security brief. That security brief had a number. It didn't discuss what the event was, and you had to sign it and said that basically you were never going to talk about it. Well, it's 42 years later, and it's been talked about before. But my story is, I washed dishes through what could have been the worst event in human history. If that boat had lost track of things, if we had lost communications, if the order had said launch at this time and we had, or if any of the other 4 or 5 boats that were out at the same time, East Coast, West Coast, had that happen and they'd have launched, the Russians would have launched too. Well, what happened in the backside of this is Ronald Reagan had to pick up the bat phone, the red phone in the White House, the one Kennedy had installed, the one that rings in Khrushchev's bedroom, pick it up and say, "Hey, we've had an error, it's been a mistake." And what had happened is somebody in the transition team wanted to screw with Ronald Reagan's guys because they had been, a bunch of dickheads. So they switched the cards in the envelope. So when it came time to run the weapons systems readiness test, the card that was inside that got inserted in the computer, the one that sent out all the messages to the fleet, was the one to launch the missiles. Just because, hey, that would be funny. And it turns out the ass clowns that did that ended up getting court-martialed and things didn't go well for them. But that transition of power that's supposed to be smooth because we're Americans, on the surface there wasn't a ripple. It happened the way it was supposed to. Ronald Reagan raised his right hand, took that solemn oath, and became the President of the United States. And he did a pretty good job for 8 years, depending on which side of the aisle you stand on. You know, he did a great job, and he certainly helped the military. Did an awful lot for me. My pay almost doubled by the time he was done with me. But somebody just thought that, you know, oh, they'll catch it, and they'll know that we screwed with them. Well, it didn't get caught till a little too far down the line, and man, things could have gone really south. But again, I come back to, I look at this and I was like, I was washing dishes, and it's kind of like, hey, we're going to launch real live nuclear weapon tipped missiles. And I was like, hey, cool, that's what we're here to do. And it's like, no, dumbass, that's the last thing we want to do, and you're an idiot. And I guess at some point they were right. I was an idiot. I really had no clue. But that's the story for today. And one last thing, you might have noticed that we're rigged for red, because on a submarine, when the lights are on rigged for red and you're on the mid-watch and you're sitting there at dark 30, that's when the really good stories come out. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you watch for more. Click like and subscribe on my channel. There will be more. And as I get a little better at this, the stories won't get any better. Well, some of them will. Some of them are really good stories, whether I tell them or not. Anyway, click like and share and let your friends know that I was here, and I hope you enjoyed this, and you know, just have a rock star day.